Good evening, YouTube, or good morning, good night, whatever time you're reading it. This is Storytime with Nani. We had a little trouble with our brand new microphone, so we're going to redo Life and Times of Pinky Calhoun, episode 7, and we got episode 8 done, but when we tried to post it, you couldn't hardly hear anything for the static. So we're going to redo 7, repost it, and then hopefully we'll get 8 out in just a day or two. For those of you who've already, bless your hearts, who've already listened all the way through episode 7. So Kevin from StoneCabinAdventures is behind the camera. I'm Lorelei out here in front of the camera. The stuff in the greenhouse is growing like nothing. Like not even a sprout. It's just like, it's growing like dirt. So, yeah.
But we have 110 soil blocks.
But we got 110 different things planted. So, or no.
Soil blocks.
Soil blocks planted.
Yes.
110 little seeds or groups of seeds. So, anyway, welcome to Storytime with Nani, and this is episode 7 of Life and Times of Pinky Calhoun. She has just found out that her brother is not her blood brother. My mouth popped open. I couldn't believe it. Does Elmer know he's not our blood? It feels like he's blood. Yes, he knows. And he also knows that we love him, and his first Pa and Ma loved him too. Pa's voice shook a little bit when he finished that story. Mine shook when I asked him the next question. I was careful to look him right square in the eyes. Pa, what happens when Letha Gates has her baby and it has red hair like yours? Pa gaped at me like I sprouted horns in a forked tail. His face and his voice went hard. What are you talking about? Letha Gates says her baby might have red hair like his pa. That's why Mr. Harkin is tied up down in his mind. He don't want to marry her. Since he's not the pa, he don't want blame for it. He'd make it terrible, Pa. Letha is going to have a baby. I nodded. Red-headed like us. He stood very still for a long time. Pinky, I don't know what red-headed man got Letha in the family way, but it wasn't me. You are the only red-headed man in town. Who else could it be? He sat back down across the table from me. Think about it. The Gateses live on the other side of Leaking Rock. Walsenburg is smaller, but sometimes they come here to do their shopping. And Pinky? Yes, Pa. That man might have been traveling through. He might not be from Leaking Rock or Walsenburg. I swear Pa was begging me to believe it wasn't him who'd been pretending to be married to that awful Letha. I wanted to believe him. Still, I felt like that huge fish had knocked me cross-eyed in the river again. My voice shook when I asked him, Are you sure, Pa? Pa breathed in so deep, I didn't think he was going to leave any air for me. I'm sure, but that won't keep the Gateses from saying that I am. I'm going to get Ma. She will help us decide what to do next. No! I screamed at him. You can't tell Ma! He walked back to the table and sat next to me. He leaned over and kissed the top of my head. I'd hug you, but I don't know where to touch you that it won't hurt. I held up my arms and he gave me a gentle squeeze. He took one of my hands and held it gentle like, I have to tell your Ma. I'm not that baby's pa, and I'm not taking the blame for it either. Your Ma needs to know what's going on so she won't be blindsided by their lies. Are you sure? I don't want her to know. Well, I don't want her to know either, but she will find out, and it will be better if she hears it from me. He patted my arm and headed to the door. How long can people live without a drink? I barely got the question out before he had the door open. Why? Are you thinking of giving up milk? No, Mr. Harkin is more than 10,000 steps deep in his mind. Letha and Rufus and Mr. Gates tied him up and left him in the dark. Mr. Gates said if Mr. Harkins won't marry Letha, they'll bust his head with a rock. He also said that after one more day without water, Mr. Harkin will be glad enough to marry her. Paul's eyebrows nearly touched his hair. Is he still in his mine? Yes, sir. He don't even know I know he's there. I'd hate for my best plans to depend on Rufus and his pa. I bet Mr. Harkin is out of hope down there alone in the dark, especially since he's all tied up. Pa came and knelt in front of me. It'll be all right. We'll take the canteen when we go get him tomorrow. Right now, you need to rest. We'll get Mr. Harkin out of his mind first thing in the morning. I looked up at the loft where Elmer and I slept. I can't climb up to bed. I can't bend my knees enough to step up. My chin wrinkled again and silent tears ran down my face. Pa picked me up and patted me. I laid my head on his shoulder and let him hold me like a baby. No, you probably can't. And if I tell you to go sleep on my bed, you'll cry yourself to sleep because you want to hear everything we say. I nodded. I don't normally cry, but Ma don't normally have to stitch me back together either. We walked outside. He walked outside to where Elmer and Ma were. By the time they started talking, I was asleep. I missed making all the plans. When the sky was turning gray the next morning, Ma sent me out to gather eggs. I hate Doodle-Doo, our rooster. That meanie don't like me either. I steal his tail feathers when I can. I have 10 of them in my treasure box. His tail feathers are long and silky black. They shine blue or green when he's in the sun. He's a special kind of chicken. Ma sometimes sells our baby chicks for a lot of money so other people can have pretty chickens too. I slid out of my chair and gimped across the kitchen to get the barn basket. I almost missed Ma giving Pa a look. So instead of going straight to the chicken coop, I snuck back around the house and stood under the kitchen window. I couldn't hear everything they said, but I could tell they didn't want me to go back in the mine in case the Gateses showed up. Elmer came and squatted next to me. Know what, Pinky? He whispered. No, what? Pa rode into town last night and told the sheriff what you told him about Mr. Harkin. I knew Elmer would never lie to me, so I asked him, Who told you? Pa made me stay up and guard you and Ma. Not that Ma needed it. She can shoot a running coyote further than from here to the river. That was far. We couldn't even see the river from here. My brother smiled in admiration of our Ma. I could have been dead. When? When you forgot to let go of the rope and ran into the riverbank? He turned his head slowly to look at me. No, and we will talk about you watching us boys swim naked later. I saw you and I forgot to let go. I meant when the Lassiter gang or whoever they were killed Ma's wagon train. They killed everyone except Ma and me. If she'd gone swimming alone, I'd be dead. I leaned over and kissed his cheek. Never swim alone. I'm glad you're not dead. Come on, let's get those eggs. And don't kick Doodle-Doo. Save being mean for Rufus. Chapter 3. We're on Chapter 3, peeps. Chapter 3, my wonderful little YouTube fans. Mr. Harkin's Mine, late May 1880. Pa and Elmer hitched up the team, and Ma made a soft place for me to lay down in the back of the wagon. I watched the sky get brighter until I went back to sleep. Pinky, you and I are going in the mine. Ma and Elmer will stay out here to watch. I sat up and looked around. I didn't remember any of the trip to Mr. Harkin's mining cabin. I sighed a reluctant whoosh of air. I'll feed the chickens and the pig. I need to tie Maggie down by the creek. Elmer's going to do that for you today. Today, we need to go see Mr. Harkin. What if the Gateses show up? Who's going to protect Ma and Elmer? Pa laughed and patted my head. It would serve them right to get crosswise of your Ma. She can read to 'em from the good book. You and I are going to go get Mr. Harkin. I don't know if I can walk that far. It's awful deep in the ground. I'll carry you if I have to. If Mr. Harkin's in bad shape, you may have to walk and carry the candle on the way back out. That's mostly what we didn't do. Pa stood me up in the back of the wagon and had me step on his gun belt, but not on his guns. He held the candle so I could wrap my arms around his neck. He toted me on his back all the way to the little room where Mr. Harkin lay face down in his own blood. Pa told me to hide behind him in case Mr. Harkin needed to cry. I figured if I'd been alone in that mine as long as he had, I'd cry too if I saw a friendly face. Pa lifted my boss's head and helped him drink from a canteen. I didn't know Pa brought his knife, but he sliced right through those ropes around Mr. Harkin's hands and feet. The newly freed man didn't even try to get up. He just laid there and rubbed himself where the ropes had dug into his skin. I peeked. Those ropes had been evilly tight. His hands and feet were fat and purple. How did you know to come here? Mr. Harkin's voice sounded like dead branches scraping on a roof. Pinky said you hadn't been home. Do you think you can walk? Pa gave him more water before he answered. I don't know. My feet feel like dead stumps and burn like wildfire. I offered. There's a wheelbarrow. It's back past a tight corner, but it has blood in it. I've been quiet up till then. I can clean it up when we get out of here. That's my blood, he said. He dragged his fat hand on his shirt and showed the bullet wound across his shoulder. Unlucky Rufus Gates is a terrible shot. He claimed he was trying to shoot me in the head. Good thing he shot me while we were outside. If he'd fired the gun in the mine, we'd probably all be dead. Pa looked at me hard. Pinky, can you lead us out of here? I don't think we dare wait any longer. The Gateses may come and try to blow up the mine. Pinky? Mr. Harkin looked around, but I guess his eyes weren't working well. Pinky, what are you doing here? I had to show Pa where you were. But how did you know? Pa pulled Mr. Harkin to his feet. We will explain everything when we're all out safe. There's no such thing as safe when those Gates animals are running loose. I should have killed them all when I seen them riding up to my cabin. I just didn't figure they'd try anything with Letha there. I couldn't believe it. She's the worst of them. He tried to walk. Mostly, his feet tracked sideways. If Pa hadn't had a good hold on him, he'd have landed face down every few steps. We finally got to the wheelbarrow. Pa loaded him up in it and slung me up on his back again. I had to be extra careful not to set Pa's hair on fire with the candle. When we got back to the little room with the table and chair, Mr. Harkin made Pa stop. I've got some gold stashed. I'd hate to lose it to the likes of the Gateses. Leave me here and go see it, if they're at the house. Pa measured him with a look. I knew Mr. Harkin was up to something, but Pa carried me out of the mine and toward Mr. Harkin's cabin. I made him stop before we got to the house. Pa, something's wrong. The chickens are down by the barn. Aren't they usually? No, them chickens likes me. They hang out by the back door in case I throw something out to 'em. They don't like whoever's in the house with Ma and Elmer. Pa sat me down and looked at me serious like. Pinky, where is the safest place for you to hide here? I reckon in the barn or maybe by the creek with Maggie. He shook his head. Creek is too far. Go hide in the barn and keep your head down. I don't want a stray bullet to get you. It wouldn't do any good to argue. Pa almost never wore his guns, but he'd strapped them both on today. I wobbled off to the barn, making sure to stay out of sight of Mr. Harkin's kitchen window. I didn't want to take a chance on Mr. Gates or Rufus seeing me. I wanted to climb into the hayloft, but couldn't bend my knees enough to reach the steps. That ladder had been built for a long-legged man, or for a man who didn't want to build even one extra step. I settled for laying down in Maggie's manger. Our mangers are bigger, but this one was big enough for me to lay down. It was full of soft hay. It smelled good, too. Once I got snuggled down in there, I began to wonder if I could get out by myself. I didn't mean to doze off. Hanging on to Pa's shoulders and standing on his gun belt shouldn't have worn me out, but it did. Maybe it was because I had to hold the candle up high without hitting the ceiling. I heard a gunshot and tried to jump out of bed, but I wasn't in my bed. It took several minutes of fighting to get my boots on the ground. Everything I tried to do to get out of that feeder either made me bend my knees or grab a hold of something with my tore-up hands. I counted the gunshots as I fought to go get help. 6 shots. Pa, Ma, Elmer, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Gates, Rufus, Letha. 8 people counting me, and 6 of them were probably dead. I couldn't even imagine life without my family. I wondered if Elmer remembered anything about his first family. I knew I'd always remember mine. Thank you for listening to episode 7. Yay! Episode 7, Pinky Calhoun. Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell. We don't want you to miss an episode. We really don't. But if you miss it, it'll be on the internet forever. It's okay. Enjoy. Thank you. Mwah.